Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are going to be reviewing a couple different pastry stouts. They are kind of exactly what they sound like. They are stouts that have been flavored with pastry type ingredients. Both beers, yet again, were sourced from Tavour. I'm going to keep doing them because I keep getting beers I could never get my hands on otherwise. And I like having a ton of new beers to sample, to try, to review, to let you know what's out there. And if you still haven't checked out Tavour, I do highly recommend it. You can check out their website at tavour.com or check out their app. It's free to download and you can see exactly what they're about. Both available on the Apple App Store and via the Android store. Nonetheless, for today's review, we've got a couple different beers, one of which is from a brewer I've had some beers from prior, all of which I thought were fantastic. The second is a collaborative brew by two brewers I've never had anything before, so I'm very excited to jump in today. We're going to be starting with Seven Stills. This is called King Size. It's a chocolate peanut butter pastry stout, and this is Imperial. Clocks in at 12.1% ABV. They are based out of San Francisco, California, and this one was brewed with cacao nibs and peanut butter. For number two, this is a collaborative brew between Destination Unknown and Gunhill Brewing. Both of them are based in New York. Destination Unknown, they're based kind of on the border between Islip and Bayshore on Long Island. And then Gunhill Brewing is based in Bronx, New York, so the northernmost borough of NYC. This one is Fresh Out of the Ovens, the name of the beer. It's a blueberry and black currant pastry stout. This one a little lower ABV at 8.3%. Both sound absolutely awesome. I've seen some different pastry stouts coming out, and I might have had one or two and not realized it. But, you know, playing up on these kind of dessert flavors in a big stout backbone, I just imagine they're both going to be great. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. Starting with the Seven Stills Brewing King Size. This one clocks in at 12.1% ABV. Okay, so jumping right into the first beer of today's pastry stout review, we've got Seven Stills King Size. This is a chocolate peanut butter pastry stout, Imperial, 12.1% ABV. They are based out of San Francisco, California. This has been brewed with cacao nibs and peanut butter. So I'm gathering that the vibe they're going for this is maybe like a chocolate peanut butter cup or like a Butterfinger, something like that, especially given the name King Size. I'm just guessing. Nonetheless, in terms of label art, they made a point to say it twice, King Size, King Size. So it does look kind of like a nod to those giant King Size candy bars. So I've got high hopes. And honestly, there's not much else to talk about in terms of label. So let's just get this cracked and poured right in the glass. I cannot wait. All right. And I suspect this will be thick. Oh yeah, that's very, very, very thick. Wow. That is a dense, thick beer. Trying to give it a chance to form a head here, a little agitation. All right. Yeah, that actually formed a pretty nice head. All right. Visually, this is absolutely pitch black. You cannot see light through this at all. So that is textbook Imperial Stout. The head that it formed really did quite lovely. I had to get pretty aggressive, but I could see it starting to try to want to make a head. And it looks relatively creamy. I can see a lot of the bubbles already starting to settle and pop, but it is what it is. Nonetheless, it looks great. Let's give it a sniff. Oh, that smells rich and boozy. I can absolutely smell the peanut butter in this. It smells very nice. And there's definitely a little chocolatey back, but it's kind of mixing with the booze and kind of the roasty edge to the malts. And there's a slight sweetness to it too. It comes through an aroma. I don't believe this was brewed with lactose, so I don't think it's going to be an Imperial milk stout, but it smells great nonetheless, albeit the aroma is not super pronounced. Once you get over it, you can really pick it up. And it does smell great. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Mmm. 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 Oh, that's big. That's rich. Oh, that's so big and rich. Wow. Wow. My first thought on taking a sip of this, and I mean this as the highest compliment, was this reminds me of a Hubbard's Cave Imperial Stout. And that is among the highest praise I can give any brewer's Imperial Stout that's flavored. They do a ton of them and they do a bang up job. This does put me in mind of that. Just the intensity of the flavor and the breadth that this beer has. It's just huge. This is just huge. Okay, so first thing you should know is that the chocolate and peanut butter does come through quite clearly, and it feels very well balanced. Almost equal parts chocolate and peanut butter. Maybe there's a little more peanut butter than chocolate, but that's okay because the malts that are in this are so deeply, richly roasted that natural richness and kind of roasty edge and chocolatey undertone is pairing and mixing with the cocoa. So having a little more peanut butter in terms of balance of the actual cocoa, not a bad thing, because it easily could have overpowered it if they had gone too much chocolate. It's very, very well balanced. There's this nice boozy kick when you first get it in your mouth as well. There's the slightest suggestion of sweetness, but it's not a sweet beer. It's very rich. It's very rich and deep and dark and dense. That's the main first reaction. Now, I'm going to jump in again for body and mouthfeel and start to explore these flavors a little more. The body to me feels medium heavy. It doesn't feel as big as you would expect. Mouthfeel's got a decent bit of viscosity to it, but again, it's not quite as thick and viscous as you'd expect. When you agitate it around the palate, it does get much thicker and very creamy, very silky. It's nice. Not as big as I anticipated, but it's nice. It still feels reasonably appropriate for the ABV range, certainly for this style. The way these flavors develop, you get a big punch of that roast up front in tandem with that slight boozy kick. It's not overbearing. It's just enough to let you know, yeah, I'm drinking a 12+% ABV beer. I have no problem with that. I rather like it. It's got a nice kick, and then it gets out of the way. It's not oppressive. And then it's big peanut butter. And then the malt roastiness starts to rise up and mix with the peanut butter. And then all those chocolate undertones start to come in. And it really does pair beautifully. I still think maybe it's a little heavier on the peanut butter side than the chocolate side. But honestly, for my money, I'm glad they didn't overdo and drown out the peanut butter flavor side with the chocolate, especially with a deep, rich roast malt bill like this. That would be very easy to do. I think they got the balance right to let both obvious flavors they're going for speak in this beer, and it does very well and beautifully. I'm going to jump in for one more sip here for final thoughts, make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, it's just so big. It's so rich. It's so enjoyable. This is a big, heavy dessert beer. Calling it a pastry stout imperial, stout, they nailed it. Put you in mind of a pastry or a candy bar. Without the addition of lactose, it doesn't have that sweetness that, if they were going for Butterfinger or Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, kind of flavor vibe, obviously the lactose would add in that sweetness and kind of play that up. They went for the pastry. So it's chocolate peanut butter. It's fantastic. It's just absolutely fantastic. This almost reminds me of a double chocolate muffin that's got peanut butter cups and peanut butter pockets in it. It's just so rich and decadent. In terms of the way that the flavor finishes after they all come together, kind of melds and holds there. It's got a pretty good intensity, and then it slowly starts to drop off. Now, the finish on the end of this, you're left with this lingering peanut butter and roastiness. The chocolate itself doesn't linger around so much as the suggestion of it, but it's much more roasty malt just pairing with this peanut butter. So it tastes like a really nice deep roast, crushed peanuts for the peanut butter and kind of chocolate mixing. It's very nice. It's got a pretty long finish. It's not ridiculously long. I wouldn't say it's top tier for the style, but it's certainly above average. Make no mistake. This is very well done, beautifully balanced. I absolutely love it. I'm going to take my time sipping on this, calling up my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review. That is the collaborative brew between Destination Unknown and Gunhill Brewing, fresh out of the oven, the blueberry and black currant pastry stout clocking in at 8.3% ABV. Okay, moving on to the second beer of today's Pastry Stout review, we have got a collaborative brew between Destination Unknown and Gunhill Brewing. Destination Unknown, again, they're kind of on the border between Islip and Bayshore, New York on Long Island, and then Gunhill Brewing is based in the Bronx, the northernmost borough of New York City. This beer is called Fresh Out of the Oven. It is a blueberry and black currant pastry stout, clocking it at 8.3% ABV. Starting out in terms of label art, it pretty much puts you in mind of what to expect based on the ingredients list, what they're going for. It looks delicious. That's a bite out of a nice oven-baked pastry. It rather looks like a croissant with some delicious filling. Nonetheless, let's get this bad boy cracked gently. Always being the operative word. All right. And let's get this poured right in the glass. Okay, this is quite a bit lighter in terms of depth of color. It's more brown than black, but it still looks nice, still very dark. And it's reasonably thick. Pouring a decent head. I'm not going to quite get the whole thing in there. Hopefully I didn't go overboard. Ooh, I just did catch it. Ooh, this is pungent. I can smell this from here, and my word, it smells amazing. You can smell that blueberry from quite a distance. Visually, though, holding it up, even though it was a brown shade versus a black shade, this is still absolutely pitch black when it's all in the glass. Holding it up to the light, you're not seeing anything through it. Formed a beautiful, lush, creamy head. Look at that. That is just thick and creamy. Wipe that back off. Looks great. Now, even though I could smell those blueberries a mile away, let's get right up on it and see what's in store. Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Oh, that smells fantastic. So I'm getting really the black currant. I'm not picking up the aroma at all. But I am for sure picking up the blueberries, and I'm picking up that malt bill. It does smell like a very classic Imperial Stout malt bill. They're not quite as roasty. And the blueberries are adding kind of the sweet smell to it. It smells very pungently of blueberry. You know, I'm sure it's a mind trick. You know, your brain associates various senses with various, you know, actual tangible things in life. I know blueberries to be sweet, so it smells sweet to me, even though I don't think this is going to be a sweet beer. I don't think they use lactose in this. It didn't mention anything about it, so I don't think it's intended to be a sweet or milk stout, but it does smell quite nice. So without further ado, that head is holding true. It looks fantastic. Smells great. Let's jump right in. Oh, man. Oh, that's very nice. Okay, so this beer, definitely the fruit are coming through. The blueberry and the black currant are both coming through really in equal parts, more or less. They're not fighting with each other for kind of presence in the beer. They're both coming through strongly, and I'll tell you, the malt bill was a brown versus a black shade, and I can tell you that the flavor that I'm getting from this is not so much stout or imperial stout, but much more akin to, say, a brown ale. That's kind of the malt bill flavor that's coming through, and it's quite clear. It's quite present. And so you're getting what tastes like a brown ale, even though it's a pastry stout, light brown in color versus dark pitch black. And they're pairing very well together. So there's almost this baked good. Really what it puts me in mind of is if you were to bake a batch of oatmeal cookies and drop fruit into them or on top of them, that's what this puts me in mind of. And it's really, really quite delicious. I'm going to jump in again for another sip. Think about the body and mouthfeel while I explore these flavors. The body is really only medium, kind of sort of teetering on medium heavy. It is not anywhere near as big as you would expect out of an 8.3% ABV. But it doesn't feel flat or breathless. It still has some presence. It's just not quite as large as I anticipated. In terms of the mouthfeel, it's not a thick beer. This feels kind of like a standard stout in terms of the fact that it's mostly flat. It doesn't have a lot of viscosity to it. It's slightly more effervescent than your average stout, I could say, in the mouth. When you agitate it around the palate, it does get a little bit more creamy, but not super creamy, and it really doesn't thicken it up that much. So in terms of kind of how it feels in the mouth, not that big, but it is very, very tasty. I'm going to jump in for one more sip because my brain is trying to process too many senses at once. So I'm going to focus entirely on this flavor development and the finish. But I must say before I do, I really like the balance of this. The balance between the malt and the fruit is just absolutely delicious. It's just delicious. It pairs so well together. You first get it in your mouth, the very first thing that comes to you is sweet. Then within the first second or two, it's just big fruit. Equal parts blueberry and black currant. And they pair beautifully together. Absolutely pair beautifully together. And it's got this slight sweet hint to it and this slight tart hint to it, but it just tastes so good. And then that malt bill comes through in the first few seconds as well. And like I said, it's not kind of a standard stout type malt bill. It puts me much, much more in mind of a brown ale. So it's got this lighter, kind of sweeter side to it, but still retaining that richness. And it's got this grain quality to it. And it really does put me in mind of oatmeal cookies that you either drop fruit into or on top of after the fact. And it really just, it tastes so good. Tastes so good. This really, they called it a pastry stout, and I totally get it. It does put me in mind of a pastry that's been baked up and had the fruit added to it, and it's really quite nice. The flavor really, the peak of intensity comes in on the front side and holds there for a few seconds and is very quickly kind of settles down. Finish on this beer is not long at all. I would say overall, it's on the low end of average in terms of length of each finish. And it's not a dry stout, it's very much wet, and it doesn't finish dry. There's no kind of drying effect on the end. And the flavors really do dissipate quite quickly. But while they're there, they are just absolutely enjoyable. This is really, really a delicious beer. And really for me, the story of this beer comes down to balance. I think the balance between the malt bill and the fruit additives is just spot on the money. I'm not sure I would tweak this anymore. That's what they did to it really makes this beer shine, and it absolutely puts me in mind of a pastry, a fruited pastry, and it's just a lovely beer. It's a lovely, lovely beer. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, call up my scores, and when we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the 7 Stills King Size, this is the Chocolate Peanut Butter Imperial Pastry Stout, clocking in at 12.1% ABV. It was brewed with cacao nibs and peanut butter, and they are based out of San Francisco, California. So starting with the aroma. The aroma was fine. You could smell the peanut butter and a little bit of sweetness that kind of insinuated chocolate. Really more so it was coming from the malt, but the aroma wasn't super pronounced. But when you got down in it, you could smell it just fine, and it smelled good. It gets a 6 out of 10. For the taste, absolutely loved it. Being that they didn't sweeten this, they didn't make it a milk stout. They let the natural richness of the ingredients and the malt bill come into play. So you got this nice, what tasted like really well roasted peanuts that were turned into peanut butter, and then that really roasty, thick, dense malt bill kind of played up on those chocolate notes. So instead of being sweet like candy, it was much more rich, and it really let the flavors speak through, and I loved it. Give it a 10 out of 10. For the body on this beer was big. Don't make a mistake here, but for 12.1% ABV, it was not as large as I anticipated. It still had good presence and was certainly well above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. The mouthfeel, similar story as to the body. It wasn't quite as thick and viscous as I anticipated, but it certainly wasn't flat. Yet again, it is well above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the finish. Finish on this beer was nice. The flavors that lingered really were the tandem of all three, the peanut butter, the cacao nibs, and kind of the underlying malt. And you got really all of them in equal parts. And it had pretty good length to it, but it wasn't top tier status. I did dock 2 points here. It gets an 8 out of 10. For the head and the retention, really did a good job. This was a very, very thick beer. I had to be very aggressive when I was pouring it into the glass to get it to form, but it did form quite well. I am certain if you had this off of a tap, especially a nitro tap at a bar, it would have formed even better. But for being poured at home, it did a great job. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook, Imperial Stout territory, pitch black. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance, really, really, really enjoyed the balance of flavors here. The malt bill, they used enough to get all the classic underlying characters out of the malt bill, but also balanced it perfectly, for my money, with the peanut butter and the cacao nibs. None of them really overshadowed the other. If anything, maybe the peanut butter had a little more, but I appreciated that because that's kind of the filler to the pastry, so to speak. And the chocolate was very nice. It was still super present, but it was really all about the balance, and frankly, I think they nailed it. I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. For the feeling and the intangible, I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed this beer. I drink a lot of dessert Imperial Stouts. I drink a lot of heavy or flavored Imperial Stouts as well, but this one was very, very enjoyable. Would have been an easy path to add some lactose into this and kind of play up the candy bar side, but I think just letting the base ingredients speak for themselves in beautiful harmony was the way to go. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this was an excellent, excellent Imperial Pastry Stout. I honestly, I thought the beer had so much going for it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it the entire time. There were a few categories where I, docked some points here. Not anything crazy except really on the aroma, but overall, I thought it was a very, very strong example of what a pastry stout can be. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on 7 Stills King Size to an 88 out of 100. So clearly well above average, and one I definitely do recommend if you're a fan of the style. Moving on to beer number 2. This is the collaborative brew between Destination Unknown and Gunhill Brewing. Destination Unknown is situated kind of on the border between Islip and Bayshore, New York, and then Gunhill Brewing is from the Bronx, New York. This beer is called Fresh Out the Oven, and it's a blueberry and black currant pastry stout, clocking it at 8.3% ABV. So quite a good bit lower in ABV, but still a nice robust ABV range for sure. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was huge. It was one of those you could smell from a great distance away, and the closer you got, the bigger the aromas got and the more pungent it became, and it smelled absolutely fantastic. I knew I was in for a treat at first sniff. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, really, really enjoyed the taste here. The fruit, which really was kind of the filling for the pastry, really, really very pronounced, very present flavor. Both the blueberry and the blackcurrant, and they were very, very, very well balanced. Really, the only thing that I kept thinking while I was drinking this beer was, in lieu of a stout kind of typical flavor profile and indeed appearance, we'll get to that, it reminded me a lot more of a brown ale, which is not a bad thing. It was very, very delicious, but I was expecting some more roasty undertones for the malt, which I didn't get. I did enjoy it, but I docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the body, quite a bit lower ABV on this one than the prior, but 8.3 is still a pretty good ABV range. That's getting on up there. The beer did have presence, but it was not nearly as robust as I anticipated at 8.3. It gets high end of average. It gets a 6 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, similar story with the mouthfeel. It wasn't flat, but it did not have the thickness and viscosity that I expected for an 8.3% ABV on a stout. It gets average here. It gets a 5 out of 10. For the head and retention, it did beautifully on this beer. It formed beautifully, and it really stuck around the whole time and kept its form. I really enjoyed it. It easily could have been poured off of a bar, but poured at my house. 10 out of 10. For the appearance, while I did make note that this beer looked and had a lot of flavor traits that put me much more in mind of a typical brown ale than a stout, once it was poured in the glass, this was very, very deep. You could not see light through it. It wasn't as pitch black as your classic stout, but it was very, very, very deep dark brown. and light couldn't pass through. And it gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Moving on to the balance, I really enjoyed the balance of this beer. The malt bill, while, like I said, it wasn't a classic stout malt bill that I anticipated, put me more in mind of a brown ale. It really worked with the ingredients that went in this beer, and the balance between the malt and the fruit additives was just excellent. And you could taste both perfectly clearly. It gets a 10 out of 10. Filling in the intangible, I really enjoyed this beer. I did dock some points in a few critical categories, but overall, I really enjoyed the experience. I only docked 1 point here. It gets a 9 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, same thing. I really thought this was a very well done pastry stout. While it wasn't exactly what I was anticipating, I think that they did a very good job, and it was very well put together. I only docked 1 point overall. It gets a 9 out of 10. Which brings the total score on the Destination Unknown / Gunhill Brewing Collaborative Beer, fresh out the oven, to an 83 out of 100. So all total, we're only looking at 5 points spread between the two beers, and they were both excellent and very strong showings for a pastry style stout. You know, this one significantly more rich, and this one obviously playing much more fruity side. So a little something different for everybody, but both well worth seeking if you're a fan of the style. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to keep in the loop whenever videos go live to YouTube, you just click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.